This is an interview with Francis Wolfe of Rosie the Riveter during World War II. The interview is at Francis and Roy Wolfe's home at 58 Damon Road, Green Hills, Ohio, on March 23rd, 2006. I am Margaret Lostrow, a board member of the National New Deal Preservation Association as part of the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress.
My name is S. Francis Wolfe, and in case you wonder what the initial S is about, I was named for my mother. Her name was Silsey, and since nobody can spell Silsey, I go by S. Francis Wolfe. I will begin to tell you, first of all, about a little bit about my background. My dad, his ancestors came from Ireland and Scotland. He was a Scotsman and a Scotch-Irish. They came as miners and settled in Maryland, and then my dad migrated and moved down to Athens County, which is a mining town, and so he was a miner most of his early life. My dad was a very talented construction man. His background was one of 9 children. He did not have a lot of education. He went to about the 4th grade, but I have to say that my dad was one of those self-taught men that went far in his career. World War II came along, and he was in the Army of Occupation in World War I, and he stayed on in Germany with that Army of Occupation and patrolled the Rhine River. World War II came along. My dad was a naval man. He was a Seabee stationed in Hawaii just after Pearl Harbor. So he was a veteran of both wars. My mother was from the old country, Europe. She began in a little town called Aix-la-Chapelle, which later became Aachen. So therefore she was French at one time. After World War I, the town became Aachen, so she became German. Her mother was from Holland. So there's quite a mixture there in my life of Scotch-Irish and French and German and Dutch and probably many, many more that I don't even know of. But anyhow, my dad met my mother because she was serving as a Red Cross nurse on the battlefield. She, when war broke out in World War I, she was sent to the convent. Well, she had been educated there, but she remained in the convent. And the girls that were housed there for their schooling were conscripted, I guess you would say, into a Red Cross unit. Their job was, after the battle, they had uniforms with the Red Cross. They would go out on the battlefield. They would see if they could help the soldiers that were wounded. They took some records of the soldiers. They were starving. Many of the soldiers wanted something to eat. They carried water and food in their musette bags, and they served on the battlefield. My dad being over there with the U.S. Army, and by the way, he enlisted when he was 16 and went over. He was underage, and he served, as I said, in the Army of Occupation, and that's where he met my mother. He, after the war and living there for 2 years, they came to America, and evidently I was conceived because I just made it to the shores of America to be born in Logan, Ohio. We stayed in Logan, Ohio until my dad looked for better jobs, and he came to Cincinnati. Now, coming back to me, after moving to Cincinnati, I lived in Springdale, Ohio. I went to Mount Healthy High School, and I met my husband, Leroy, in Muscoff's algebra class. If anybody knows Muscoff, he taught algebra at Mount Healthy High School. Roy and I began to go together. This was before World War II. This would have been about 1936. Prior to that time, I had gone overseas to live with some of my mother's folks for a year, and then came back and started in to high school, and that's where I met my husband, Leroy. We went together all those years until war was declared, World War II. We happened to be wrapping our Christmas presents that we were to give to our family, and had the radio on and heard the President Roosevelt declare war on Japan, and that we had been attacked by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor. We decided right then and there that we would marry, and it wasn't too long after that, February the 14th, 1942, that we married. In October of that year, having signed up for the draft, my husband was inducted into the U.S. Army over at Fort Thomas, Kentucky. From there, he went to Atlantic City for his training and was now in the Army Air Force. After his basic training in Atlantic City, he went to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and I followed him there while he went to radio school. And I worked for the Manchester Biscuit Company, which was a division of Keebler, I believe. And I worked for them while he went to school in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Well, if anybody's familiar with Army ways of doing things, when it got to be Florida, we were there during the cold weather. I arrived there on Thanksgiving with 40 below zero. However, when he finished his schooling, we went to Florida. We went to Boca Raton, Florida, and there he continued his education in radio school. And of course, it's really warm there, so we go from 40 below zero to around 80 degrees. So we had a a really great time in Florida. While I was there, I got a job. My friend Margie, who is gone now, we were buddies because her husband was going to school there as well. So we traveled by the Dixie Flyer railroad. That was the name of it. I can't remember what the line was. Anyhow, it was a Dixie Flyer that took us to Florida, stopping at every little podunk station along the way, and we finally arrived in Florida. While there, I always had to work. I got a job being a governess for a colonel, and his name was Colonel Nelson. I got a job taking care of his daughter. So I had a room at his home out on the beach. And every day we would go down, his daughter and me, and I'm trying to remember her name. I can't remember what that was at all. No, it just won't come to me. But anyhow, we would go down on the beach. The beach was patrolled by the Coast Guard down there, and all citizens living on the beach were instructed to gather any identification of soldiers or whatever that had from their ships that had sunk and washed, and the identification had washed up on the beach. So we found lots and lots of that. And turned that over, of course, to the United States Coast Guard. Also, at nighttime, we were blacked out with the blackout drapes drawn tightly all across the house because submarines were lurking very, very close to shore down in the Florida portion of that area on the Atlantic. In the meantime, my husband was finished his schooling and he got his notice to join a group of men that were going to be
Salt Lake City first.
He got his notice to join a group of men that would be going out to Salt Lake City. And then from there, he traveled to Salt Lake City. From there, he was sent to Madison, Wisconsin, because his group had left Salt Lake City. He got to Madison, Wisconsin. He found out that his group had already left there and was at a port of embarkation in New Jersey. And so all this time he was traveling under sealed orders. I did not know where he was. But being under sealed orders and only 4 men or 5 men traveling together, I think that they cheated a little bit and opened their orders and they found out where they were going. And I got a telephone call saying that they were going to New Jersey. So I caught the first train out of New Jersey, or out of Florida, Boca Raton, Florida, and traveled to New Jersey. But the question was, where do I find him once I get there? So I, having been around the Army camps a long time, you go to the USO and you tell them that you would like a room somewhere and that you want to find your husband. The USO said, "We're sorry, that's sealed orders out there at the port of embarkation, so you will have to just go home." That's not part of my nature. I was not raised to give up, and so I decided on my own, I'm going out to that base and I'm going to find him out there. So I have my suitcase and I trundle along this highway and I come to the fence. And I think, oh, I am here. So I'm going into the provost marshal and I'm going to ask him, where is my husband? I go into the provost marshal's office and the provost asked me, how do you know he's here? And I said, well, I just don't care to tell you how I'm here, but here I am, and I would like for you to find my husband. And he said, well, little lady, he called me. He says, I think you'd better turn around and go home because I cannot give you that information. So I don't take no for an answer, and I think I will just walk along this fence and just see the lay of the land, and maybe I can get somebody's attention and find out that way. So I was walking along with my suitcase, and lo and behold, here comes my husband over to the service club and sees me walking along that highway. And so there we were. Well, my husband went in and went to his commanding officer there, and he tells him that I'm there and I have a room in town, and that's the whole story. He would like some time off to visit with me.
I had never had a leave, not a furlough.
He had never had a leave, and so therefore the captain was very understanding, and he said, well, since you have never had a leave, he said, all I want you to do is go in every morning after you have stood roll call, and you be back for the next morning's roll call. So we had probably 3-4 days in New York City, and we lived it to the hilt. We went to every famous place that New York had, Jack Dempsey's restaurant, just everywhere. We just had a great time. And I want to tell you that New York City during that wartime was a wonderful place to be, with all the other soldiers from the Navy and the Army and Marines and everything. We just had a high old time. Anyhow, it was one morning, he stood roll call, and he did not come back. And so he was on his way to England. And I had to finally get on the train and come home. By the time I got home, I had one sister. Her name is Jean. And Jean, my mother, and me were 3 war widows. Wives, I should say. We weren't widows. We were wives that lived together. In the meantime, my sister's husband had been sent out to Medford, Oregon. He was with the Army Engineers, and my sister had a baby. So it was my mother, my sister, me, and the baby that kept house during World War II. I had to get a job, and I thought, where shall I go for a job? So first I went to Philip Carey. That was not very interesting to me. My skills were in the office, the business area. I had been trained in high school to be a business person, office person. So, but that just didn't do the job. But Wright Aeronautical was calling for women to take the place of men to come and take their training. I'll never forget, I went down on Reading Road. I was issued the blue coveralls that you see in many pictures, in the cap. For 2 months, I was trained to work on a lathe in the shop, and then sent out to Wright Aeronautical. I worked on the lathe for, I can't remember exactly how long. It wasn't too long, and they decided that I was really, really good at inspection. And at that time, we were building B-17s, and my husband being in England with a B-17 group, that was right up my alley. The oil from the lathe had not agreed with my skin, and therefore I transferred over into the inspection department, and they were then aware of my business training and everything, so they thought that I would do a great job in the production office of the B-17s. I worked 7 days a week. I went in at midnight and worked until 7 in the morning, or 11, not midnight, 11 o'clock at night, and worked till 7 in the morning. After I left work, I drove to Deaconess Hospital, where I had been trained early on as a nurse aide. Nurse aides pretty much ran the hospitals in Cincinnati. The nurses had gone to war. Most of the regular nurses, the RNs and so on, were sent both to the Pacific and the European areas of war, and so therefore trained nurse aides by the Red Cross took over their duties. I went through about a 6-month training period that I was able to do most everything that a nurse would do, and so I did that after working the midnight shift. I did that for 7 days a week, and that was pretty much what my life was. I have to tell you that also everything was rationed here in the States. You couldn't get sugar without a stamp. You couldn't buy a pair of shoes without a stamp. Meat. All of these things were rationed, as well as tires for your automobile, your gasoline to get to work. So Wright Aeronautical devised a plan where it was a share the ride type of thing. Well, I lived in the outside the city, but close to Lawrenceburg and Aurora, Indiana. So my ride, if I was going to get to work, was going to have to come from those areas. And lo and behold, I got my assignment, and I was assigned to this one driver who every evening or every night around 10:30 or so picked me up in a truck that had a big tank on the back that carried pig slop. And so another fella rode, so they stuck me in the middle of them, and away we went off to work. Well, what would happen in the morning was that this truck with the big tank on would go over to the brewery and pick up all the mash, I guess, from the brewing the beers and everything, and they would put that in the tank and then take it home and, of course, feed that to their pigs. I had a driver then that took me on to the hospital and brought me home. So it was very difficult to get around, but, not one of us really had any complaints about it. The men were off at war. We were doing our part. I was called at that time a Rosie the Riveter. And so I, did my share in the defense plans by what I contributed to the war. And so in my blue overalls, I am now known as a Rosie the Riveter. The rest. Okay, I want to go back a little bit to where I mentioned my sister on the tape. As I said, my sister had a baby, and her husband was with the engineers, the Army engineers, and he was stationed in Medford, Oregon. My sister would like to go and stay with him in Medford, Oregon, until he was ready to be shipped overseas. Now, how were we going to get our gas? How were we going to get our tires? What would we do with this very, very young baby? So I remember he was about no more than 6 weeks old. And we appealed to the board for extra gasoline. And servicemen then did have a priority on the gasoline if they came home for furloughs or things of that kind. So we appealed to the board, and the board issued us some stamps that we could drive from Cincinnati, from Springdale to Medford, Oregon. My sister had a convertible, and which had a small back seat. So we had two drivers, and we put Ron the baby in a basket in the back seat, and we took off for Medford, Oregon. That's a distance of about, I will guess, around close to 3,000 miles. I spent 5 days or 6 days on the road. I don't remember exactly, but every evening we would get a place to stay in the motel, and we would wash baby's diapers. We would fix formula. We would probably get to bed around midnight and then up early the next morning. Everything went very well. Before we left home, I should say that my mother told us never to feed that baby while we were driving. We had to stop every time he needed a bottle and give him that bottle. So we did that because we didn't want anything to happen to him. So we got in Salt Lake City, and we knew we had to cross the desert to get to the other side, going to Medford, Oregon. And we were told not to do it during the daytime, but to travel at night when the desert became cooler. So we waited until around, I think around 6 o'clock, and we got in the car, and we really felt leery about crossing this desert at nighttime. So we decided if we saw a soldier that was hitchhiking, we were going to stop and pick that soldier up so that if we had flat tires or anything happened to us on the desert, he would know what to do. Well, we were on the outskirts of Salt Lake City, and lo and behold, here is this lone soldier. He's hitchhiking, and we pull over, and he gets in the car, and he sits with the baby in the back seat, and so we head across the desert. Well, it got pitch black, and all of a sudden our lights began to dim, and we wondered, oh my goodness, what are we going to do now if our lights go out? Well, sure enough, our lights went out, and there we were out on this road with not knowing where in the world we were going and not being able to see because it's pitch black. And all of a sudden I see a little red light up ahead of us, like a backup or a stop light on the back of something. And we decided to follow that little red light. When we got closer to it, it was another car traveling over that had a trailer with a little black red light on it. And so when he would jog on the road, we would jog. When he would turn a different way, we turned a different way. And we followed him all the way into Elko, Nevada, which is where this soldier that we had in the back seat was stationed, and there was a big gambling house and hotel right there at Elko, Nevada. So we went in to get a room. This would be around 4 o'clock in the morning, I guess, and we still had to do diapers and we still had to do formula. And so we asked the man at the desk, and he says, "I'm sorry, we are filled up. There is no room here." But he said, the bartender he's off duty, or he just came on duty, so his room is available, and we'll put you in the bartender's room. So my sister, me, and the baby, we go into the bartender's room, and we do all of our things. Well, in the meantime, what had gone wrong with our car was the generator had gone out. And so they had to call in to, I can't remember what the city was, to get a new generator. Well, that happened late in the afternoon, and we were back on the road, and we made it across the desert that night. So we pulled on into Medford, Oregon, in good shape then with Ronnie and the baby. And then I took the train home again. Trains were great during the war. I wish we had them now. We could get on a train and just about go anywhere we wanted to in good time. And traveling with the soldiers was delightful. They were always very courteous and helpful to women. And it was a great joy to travel by train. So I came back home and then proceeded to go back into my work and wait for my husband to come home from service. He came home from service in 1945, and he came into Indiantown Gap, and I said, well, I've got to go pick him up there at Indiantown Gap. And so by that time, I had some reconditioned tires on the car, and we drove up and picked him up at Indiantown Gap, and then came back home for 3 days, and then he and I got a train again, went back, and that's where he was
Mustard out.
mustered. Was looking for the word mustered out of the service. From there on, it was raising our family. We had to look for a house. And in Green Hills, the little town where I now live, is where we finally moved in February the 14th, 1948. We had one child, Gary, by this time, and we loved Green Hills, and that's where we are today. And I have to say that it probably will be where we will end up our days as well, because we are no longer spring chickens. What can I say next to tell you about Green Hills? Green Hills during the war, I will say this. Green Hills during the war was very much affected by World War II. It was a new community. It was built by, during Franklin Roosevelt's administration. And that would go back to 1937, 38, when what we call the pioneers moved into Green Hills. And so they were here during the war. Many of the soldiers in that time, if they happened to come home from furlough, had to walk about 4 miles from the nearest bus to just get home to Green Hills. But the people were very much welcoming and so on. So Green Hills has quite a history of being a real community that people like one another and help one another. I'm going to end maybe with my affiliation with the Rosie the Riveters. The National Park Service had an article in one of the magazines asking Rosie the Riveters to send in their experiences during the war. They also published a little book, and it's called Rosie, and has a lot of the, it says A Day with Rosie, had a lot of the experiences of the Rosie the Riveters. And I sent in a letter, and I'd like to read this onto the tape so that you would kind of get the feeling for what a Rosie the Riveter did. As I write this, which was back in 2004, it says, even though I am 81 years old, World War II memories remain vivid. With my husband overseas with the 8th Air Force, I went to work as a Rosie for Wright Aeronautical, maker of B-17 Flying Fortress engines, as a lathe operator. When a reaction to the cutting oil became a problem, I transferred to the production office, working the midnight shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 7 days a week. 3 of those days after work, I was a nurse aide at the local hospital. That was the Deaconess Hospital, as the nurses had gone to war. I want to say the women of the United States served proudly for our country. And that was what I sent in for the archives of the National Park Service. Since that time, the National Park Service is busy hoping to start a museum. It would be called the Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historical Park, and it would be in and around Richmond, California. I have not heard too much about this. By the way, I am registered as Rosie the Riveter 2963. That is my number in the United States, Rosie the Riveter organization. And I'm looking forward to some public meetings on this group of women and park officials and so on, and being involved in that program. I don't know if I have left anything out. Probably a lot that I could go into, but it would take me a long, long time, so I'm going to close off at this point.
Okay. Well, I thank you very much, Fran. It was very interesting and very well done.
Thank you.